if you fill that application forms and you've noticed that they're collecting information about you, asking questions about you, and demanding information of you that isn't on your CV, and you find that frustrating, it may well be frustrating, but it's also a warning sign. It's telling you that the employer or recruiter is trying to extract information from you that they know they won't find on the average CV. And if that's the case, you know you've got a problem, because what they're asking for is information they can make a decision on you about, i.e. did they interview you or not. If you're using the same format of CV as you have had since leaving education, at whatever level of education that may be, then again, I'm afraid that's probably not such a good thing. Things have moved on. And if you've got more than 5 to 10 years of experience and you're still following the same format of CV that you had a few years back, that's definitely a warning sign. You need to take some action to improve and enhance your CV and make it more relevant to today's marketplace. And sorry, the point that we originally got to when I realised the slides weren't updating was that the message you should take away, the single most important message this evening about your CV, is that it should present to your target audience a business case as to why somebody should hire you. So just imagine anything that you've bought recently, be that a house, car, washing machine, piece of hi-fi, whatever it might have been. You probably bought it partly on a need, of course, you know, something in your mind determined that you need to go and do something, but then you were influenced by a whole heap of marketing material, advertisements, internet reviews, whatever it may be, price, sales, discounts, whatever. But that's the important thing. You were influenced. You were given some information by a third party to influence your decision and give you information to allow you to make that decision hopefully more easily. And your CV is the same kind of thing. You are a product or service to the marketplace, whether you like that or not. That's the harsh reality. In theory, you have a range of abilities, competencies that would provide a solution to your target audience, i.e. the employer. And so your CV needs to be that marketing tool, that sales document that convinces the recruiter or intermediary or employer that they should be considering at least interviewing you because of what they see on your CV. And so a list of things, going back to that first point, if you're just providing your audience with a list, guess what? It doesn't look very different compared to all the other people that are applying for the same job. Most people's CVs, if they've not had it professionally written or they've taken the time to think about it, most CVs tend to look pretty similar, unsurprisingly. So let's say it's an IT project manager job. The average number of applicants will be, I don't know, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe even touching 100. So it's a lot of people to have to look through. If the CVs are all pretty much the same, the recruiter or employer finds it incredibly depressing. Consequently, they spend very little time, in fact, arguably too little time, looking at people in any detail. They'll skim the first page of your CV, make a very quick judgment. They want to get that 100 applications down to 10 or less, decide who to interview, move on. You'll get 5 to 20 seconds if you're lucky of somebody's time. So they're not going to sit down with a cup of coffee and look at your CV and review it in depth. Generally speaking anyway, there are exceptions to every rule, particularly if the application numbers are low, but generally speaking most jobs get a lot of applicants. Some of those applicants are time wasters, some of them are relevant. The recruiter or employer is not to know that when they start the process, so all they're thinking is there's 100 applications, give or take. I want to get it down to single digits, give or take. I don't want to spend all morning doing that, so I'm going to rattle through all these applications and make a very quick decision. So if your CV just appears to be the same as everybody else's CV out there, and it's not really saying very much about you, it's not presenting a business case to your target audience, chances are you'll get rejected at that point without much consideration, and they won't have gone beyond page 1 of your CV to make that decision. So, in summary, that most important point, a bad CV is just a list of things with no differentiators on it. A good CV is a business case, an advertisement, a marketing document, a sales tool, whatever you want to call it, but it's promoting why you would be good for that business. That's really important. The reason why there's a problem with just providing a list to people, or indeed following a format that you have followed since you started working, and as I say, if that's 5-10 years old, that's a warning sign. Part of the reason behind that being a negative thing is because, of course, with the advent of the internet, job boards, databases, and various tools, your document now becomes very important online or electronically as far as it's being stored. And so if your document's full of words that aren't currently topical, that aren't being searched for, or phrases that are being searched for don't appear on your CV, it will not get picked up in search as easily as it should be. So a modern, effective CV, not only does it present a business case to your audience, but it needs to be searched and found well electronically. So the structure of the document needs to be sorted before you go out to market in an ideal world. That's really important. Now, I sort of hinted at part of my spiel earlier that it's important to make a judgment. You need to be able to decide, does your CV meet its requirements? Does it meet the market requirements or not? How do you know that? Well, I've given you some of the clues. So if it's a list, bad thing. If it's the same format as your left education, bad thing. If it's not presenting a business case to your target audience, that's a bad thing. But the ultimate test, so again, probably second most important thing to take away from this evening, the acid test for your CV is whether it's getting you enough interviews. And too many people focus on a whole host of other things, including getting a job. The CV's job is to get you the interview. And that is different from getting the job, which probably most of you realise. Getting the job requires a whole different skill set. It involves most often face-to-face contact and communication. And by the time you're offered the job, the CV is almost forgotten. The CV's job is to get you in front of the decision maker in the first place. So its requirements are actually subtly different from what most people think. And that's why people tend to write bad CVs, is they don't focus on what its job is and who the person making the decision and what they're looking for. So the acid test is this ratio of, if you apply for, say, 10 jobs, how many, and they're assuming, of course, that they're jobs you know you could perform and that you have the skills for. If you don't get any interviews for those 10 jobs, that's a bad thing, of course, but it points to the CV being a problem. It's got nothing to do with you as an individual, because people don't know you, generally speaking. If they do know you, that's a bad sign, of course, and that's something else different. It's beyond the scope of this evening. But as I say, no interviews out of 10 applications for jobs you know you could perform. It's almost certainly down to the CV or the message that it's communicating to your target audience. If you're getting 10 out of 10 interviews, then you can sign off now and go away, and you know your CV's performing. If it's somewhere in the middle, the 4, 5, 6, it can be improved, but it depends on whether you need it to improve. If historically you get that kind of hit rate and you're still getting jobs that you're happy with, happy days. But if you're not, and you need actually more plates spinning, so to speak, to be able to convert at least one of those interviews into a job offer, of course it's an indicator, again, you need to do something different with the CV. So our argument is, and our message normally to people is, look at that. If you don't already have the stats, then okay, you might have to go through some pain before you get those stats. But most people know broadly whether they're getting interviews or not if they're active in the job market. And if you're still not clear on whether your CV is up to the job, then we can take a look at it and appraise it for free, which is one of the services they offer. So by all means, take a look at our website. The domain's down at the bottom of each slide. There's a free appraisal tag. You can send your CV. We'll take a look at it and give you our best guess as to whether we think it would work in the marketplace or not. But if you've already got that painful set of statistics, the key thing is, if you're not getting interviews to enough jobs for you to be happy, it's the CV that's the problem 9 times out of 10, higher than 9 times out of 10, and therefore you know you need to do something about it or not. So that's really important. Generally speaking, a lot of people say to us, okay, well, big deal, if I get my CV sorted properly, would it make a difference? Well, of course, the message is, yes, it would. This doesn't matter whether you write it, we write it, or anybody else writes it. If it's done properly to fit the expectations of your target audience, which is a skill in its own right, but if you get that sorted, you will notice a dramatic increase in the number of interviews you get. That's proven beyond all shadow of a doubt. Typically, from our stats, it's a 30 to 50% increase on average. We see some massive swings, literally in the hundreds of percentages, because there are people who have got such a hideous CV, they've applied for hundreds of jobs, no interest. As soon as we get it sorted, suddenly they're getting interviews. So there's that one end of the extreme, there's that. The other end of the extreme, there are some people who just want to go to market to maybe get a slightly more salary out of their job rather than to move jobs, and that's a slightly different kettle of fish. But on average, we make a substantial double-digit percentage increase in getting interviews for the clients that we work with. So it does make a difference having a good CV, as I say, whoever writes it. Now we're going to take a look at the structure of the CV now if you were writing it. So I'm trying to give you some background to say, okay, well, the most important thing is you need to know whether your CV is performing or not. If it's not, or if you suspect it might not in the future, you need to make a decision about what to do. If you then decide, okay, I need to tackle this, of course there's a couple of options. You either do it yourself or you get somebody else to do it. And irrespective of which of those decisions you make, should you get that far, then it would be helpful perhaps to know the kind of structure as to what makes a successful CV. And so if we were writing the CV, this is how we do it, and the kind of sections and content that we'd use. So we start off, and I'll show you a real-life example very shortly when I've talked through a couple of these sections. But remember always that most important message, we're trying to build a business case for your target audience. Okay, so if we're trying to build a business case and explain what on earth you've got to offer the world, there are some things you need to do. We start the CV with what we call a professional or executive summary. What you call it doesn't really matter. Some people call it a profile. Some people mistakenly call it an objective and then go on to explain what's not an objective. Some people call it a personal profile. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but it is important about what the content is because most people get this hideously wrong. The very first thing you need to be talking about is explaining what you are, and that may seem very obvious, but most people don't do it. So if, for example, you are applying for IT project management jobs, you need to pretty much say that that's what you are. If you're going for financial director roles, you need to describe that that is what you are. And it may seem obvious, and you may think, yeah, but that's later on my CV. Please remember, you only got this 5 to 20 seconds of somebody's time in the first filtering process of your CV. So if you don't explain to the reader that you are exactly what they're looking for in the first place, there is a huge risk that they will move on or disregard you or reject you. So make it clear very quickly that you are in effect what they're looking for, either by a generic job title, a specific job title, whatever you can justify and whatever links to the target audience's expectations. So you could take it wider. If you are really good at winning new business, you could say, yeah, you're an exceptional salesperson with proven skills in such and such a marketplace. That's the kind of sentiment. You just need to make it very clear straight away that you are what these people are actually looking for. Again, a bit of a cliche, I'm afraid, but you need to describe to your target audience, in effect, what is your value proposition? What have you got to offer the world? What are you good at? In a summary, at this stage, this is just about, yeah, if you're a finance director, then maybe one of the strengths that you've got is reducing costs and increasing profitability. You've got a track record in that. That's the kind of sentiment. Linked to that is 4 or 5 things that you're particularly good at. So most people have a job where if they sat down and thought about it, there's one thing that they're maybe really good at, or it's the core thing, and the whole thing about the job is about being good at something. But then normally most people have got maybe 3, 4, 5 other things that they're pretty strong at, or they're interested in, or they could deliver a result across. You need to be talking about those sorts of things as well. We'll take a look at an example shortly, so it makes it a bit easier. And then finally, you remember I talked about hot skills earlier on? You need to link all of this content to those hot skills in the marketplace. So a lot of people sit down, they're very insular, they know all about what they've been doing, but they totally fail to recognize what the market's expecting. So they write all the good things that they think sound good, but when the reader takes hold of the CV, they think, well, big deal, so what? This is not what I'm after. This isn't relevant in the marketplace anymore. So it's really important you align all those good things you're talking about to what the market actually expects for the kind of job that you're interested in. Now this wall of text that's just about to hit your screens is an example of a typical opening professional or executive summary for a real-life person. Obviously we've removed any obvious clues, but it happens to be a finance director. It doesn't matter what level you are at. It doesn't matter whether you've just graduated and you've got no work experience, whether you're 65 years old and you're wanting to get an interim job or a part-time job, whether you've worked on a supermarket checkout, whether you've managed Manchester United Football Club. It doesn't matter. Everybody at any level of job, in any position, with or without experience, can write something like this. The important thing is the content. It differs, of course, and the relevance to the marketplace and what the target audience is expecting to see. I'll let you read this for yourselves, but it addresses all the points I've just mentioned above. It's describing what the individual is, a finance director with some experience. It describes their value proposition, which is all about their financial governance, protecting cash flow and profitability. It then describes some other things that they're good at, and we have to assume for the purposes of this evening that they are aligned with the hot skills in the marketplace, because we don't know, of course. So that's the kind of opening statement. Now you'll notice one other thing, and this is a really good way of assessing whether whatever you've got on your CV comes anywhere close to this. It doesn't talk about enthusiasm of the individual, communication skills, interpersonal skills, dedication, commitment, being able to work as an individual or as part of a team. None of that nonsense. And why do I say that is nonsense? Because none of those things could be proven on the CV. They're all useful attributes. They're all useful qualities. Employers would like to have people with enthusiasm and dedication, but there's no point in mentioning that on your CV. It makes no difference at all to whether you get an interview or not. And also, most employers and recruiters, although they won't tell you to your face, they don't want to see that. It's of no relevance to them. They'll make the judgment about how enthusiastic you are, whether you've got good communication skills when they physically meet you. And truth be told, for a lot of those things, they won't know whether you're any good at those things until you've been in the job for 2 or 3 months. So why mention them on the CV? Totally irrelevant. So focus on what are you, what's your value proposition, what are you good at, and align that with the hot skills in the marketplace. Just that one change makes such a difference. People start getting interviews purely because they get that right. So if your opening profile, if you have one, some people don't, but if you have one, and it's describing all the wonderful things you are that can't actually be proven later on in the CV, another warning sign, and you need to do something about that. Unless, of course, you're very lucky and you're still getting the interviews, and that is possible. So that is why the acid test is, if you're getting interviews to a level of that's satisfactory, yeah, a lot of this, it doesn't really matter, because the purpose of the CV is to get you interviews. Our job is to say, okay, if you're not getting any interviews, what can you do to fix that problem? These are the things that we know work in the marketplace. But some people are just lucky and they get away with it for a variety of reasons. Okay, so that's the opening statement. So that's the top of your CV, and we'll see, as I say, I'll show you a real-life example very shortly. But there's another section that I want to talk about before we get there, which is that for a couple of reasons, we need to provide your target audience with a summary of some of the things that you've got, which they would find useful in their business. So we provide an area on the CV which highlights some of the skills that you've got. Visually, as you'll see in a short while, it looks good. Most importantly, this is the area that allows you to populate your CV with phrases and keywords that will then be picked up electronically, searched for, and allow your document to appear in more searches than it might otherwise do so, without having to sort of force the words and phrases awkwardly into your CV. I'll give you some examples. So we have an area literally with some bullet points, possibly 5 or 6 down the left-hand side, 5 or 6 down the right-hand side. And all they're doing is stating phrases and words that we know people are searching for electronically. So if you're a recruiter or an employer and you're sitting on a big database of applicants or potential candidates, and you know you're looking for certain skill sets, these are the kind of things that people would type into their search engine and then get results. So if you get this bit right, your CV appears more often than not. It's also an area in which you can just reaffirm certain skills and abilities that you have, so visually it just looks stronger as well. The comment at the bottom of the screen is actually quite important, although it may seem very obvious. The comment in red, that is, and it's that the vast majority of recruiters and hiring managers make their shortlisting decisions on the content of your CV. And you may think, well, big deal, but behind that lurks a really important message. and that is that how on earth else would they make that decision? So for the mathematicians amongst you, the difference between the 100% and the 92% is those folk who do actually know you, who may have been given your name by word of mouth or referred, or that might purely have seen you on some other medium, like LinkedIn, possibly. But the vast majority of people can only make a decision on whether they actually interview you based on the contents of your CV. That's all they've got. They haven't got a magic crystal ball. They can't actually see inside your mind. So if you don't get what is important on your CV to your target audience, and that's the only thing they can judge you on, that is why you may be suffering pain and not getting the interviews that you want, because you're not sending them the content and the message they're expecting to see. So the CV is really important. It still is the most important tool to get you a job for most people. LinkedIn's catching up, but it's not quite there. So I've talked about two sections of the CV, the opening professional summary, that paragraph, and then maybe an area with some bullet points. So let me show you an example now of how that might look on paper. So on your screen, gradually, most people should be getting this appearing. It's just coming through now. Looks like, here we go. I think most people can see that now. On your screen, sorry, it's taken a little while to filter through. I don't know what technical gremlins are lurking there, but hopefully you can see the top half of page 1 of a CV that would be typical of a CV that we'd be writing. I'm still getting, I'm still only getting, oh yeah, okay, no, it's okay, so it's showing through. I do apologize, it just looks like this. I hope you can see it, but I'm getting mixed messages fed back to me about who can see it and who can't. So I'm assuming now that everybody can see that on their screen. Just also a reminder for those that came in later to the webinar, I noticed some questions being asked. It is only an audio broadcast, so I can't see or hear you. You can only hear me and see the slides. If you've got any questions, just bung them in the question facility on your GoToWebinar toolbar, and I'll deal with them right at the end of the session for those that want to hang on and listen to the answers. So if you do have any questions, just bung them in the question facility, and at the end of the session, those that need to disappear can go. But if you want to listen to the answers, normally people ask some really good questions, by all means hang on, and I'll let you know when we shut the whole thing down. And thank you for those that just said they can see the CV. I'm just getting some dodgy information here from GoToWebinar about who can see what, but I'll assume all can see it. On the screen there should be a CV headed Matt Craven. So Matt's our boss, runs the business, but this is a real life CV. It's his CV that is full of real information. And so we've talked about the first two sections so far, the executive summary as we've called it here, and although we've called it expertise, the key skills box, which contains bullet points with 2 or 3, possibly 4-word statements tops. And as I say, the important thing here is, remember, we're building a business case, so that it's a bit of a story, if you like. The introductory bit is saying, here's Matt Craven. Notice that, and I'll come on to this later, notice there's no massive personal information here. So we're not saying where Matt lives, we're not giving his address, we're not giving his marital status, his date of birth, hobbies, interests, any of that nonsense. And I only say nonsense because it's not relevant to the interview process. All that's important about the first page of your CV is who on earth are you? How can somebody get hold of you if they're compelled to do exactly that? So mobile, email, office, home, whatever number suits, whatever contact details are appropriate. And then as quickly as possible, cutting to the chase, basically saying, what are you? What's your value proposition? What are you good at? And then moving into the bullet point key skill area. So this is a typical example. That's how it would look. If we were writing your CV, give or take a few things, this is pretty much how it would look. We've done this for a number of years. The content's changed over those years, but the actual flow has not, and it works. It makes a big difference. We know that already. I'll come back to this shortly because there's some other bits you can see just lurking at the bottom of this slide, but those are the two bits. That's how it would look and feel. And you can see we're only dealing in the top 30% of page 1 so far. Okay, so lurking next is, and you'll notice we're still not saying where you're currently working. There's a reason for that, which I'll touch on later, but it's important that you build the business case. Why should somebody hire you? Well, unless you're very lucky, the reason why they should hire you has got pretty much nothing to do with who you're currently working for. In fact, in some cases, that might actually harm you, particularly if you had gaps in your career or you're working for a business with an odd job title or a business that nobody's ever heard of, or you're trying to switch industries. You don't want to leave with your least valuable information. You want to build this business case, explain to your target audience what you've got to offer them, which is valid to them and makes sense to them, before getting into all of the other stuff which you can't change, particularly if that doesn't work to your advantage. So the way we handle things is that we've said, okay, in the professional summary, here are the things that you're good at, your value proposition, what you are. You talked about some key skills. We then have an area called career highlights where we're providing proof of those very things we've just made claims for. So the first thing to note is that your ability to be able to write content is really important. And interesting, most people don't like this bit. They find it difficult to identify maybe things that they've done well in their life, maybe feeling a bit modest about things, which is fair enough. That's not a problem. Or find it difficult to write succinctly and concisely about something that's actually been quite complicated. So when people try and have a go at this and write about good things that they've done, the way they tend to go wrong is that they go on for too long, or they go on about stuff that's not relevant. We'll touch on that shortly. Or they talk about things in an inappropriate way that doesn't make sense to the target audience. So your ability to write good content is really important here. If you don't know how to do that, or you feel it's a weakness of yours, don't accept that and just do it anyway and submit a CV. Get help. Get somebody to sort it. We use a methodology. It's not unique to us. You may have heard of this or something similar called STAR, and that stands for Situation, Task, Actions, and Results. It's a really good way of condensing complex projects, assignments, events in your life into something more meaningful and manageable, and being able to compartmentalize it so it reads quite well. It's also a really useful way of being able to deal with competency-based questions if you've ever had to face those in your life. And so for those of you that have been through that process, you'll know you'll often get asked at an interview, tell us a time when, give us an example of when you did this. When was the last time you experienced such and such a thing? And you have to think about what it was in the first place and then try and give a meaningful answer without going off the rails or going off at tangents or talking for several hours on the subject. STAR's a great way of dealing with these kind of examples. I'll give you an example. So this piece of text is a typical career highlight. It is off Matt's CV, actually, as you'll shortly see. What we're trying to do here is to prove. So we've just said Matt's good at certain things. So if this were you, you'd be describing in your professional summary what you're good at, what your value proposition is, what you've got to offer the world. We're then talking about key skills. Then we're saying, here are some examples, typically 3, as we'll see shortly. 3 solid examples of where you can deliver the skills you've just claimed to have had. Matt's example here, I won't read it verbatim, you can see it for yourself on screen, but the first sentence is the situation. So ERAC, which stands for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, just so you know, it's not that important, but just so you know. Enterprise Rent-A-Car acquired an unprofitable competitor in the south of England that required transformation. So that's the situation, the background, the explanation. So anybody looking at that think, okay, don't know much about them necessarily, that's not important, but I can see that the premise of this is all about an unprofitable business that's been bought by another business and it needed sorting out. So that's the situation. The next sentence is the task. Rather confusingly, it's not actually anything about what Matt did, it's the responsibility that was resting on his shoulders. That's the way to look at it, really. And it's describing the title of job he had and what he had to do within that business in theory. The actions are the things that he actually did. So from the word performed, top to bottom review of business, through to the last sentence, those are the things that Matt did to fulfill the task. And then the final sentence is the result. Succeeded in rebranding the business and achieving a certain level of profitability within a certain time scale. So that thing, as it's indicated, it took about 6 months for Matt to do that. So hugely complex, took a lot of his time, probably loads of ups and downs. He could probably write a book on it if he wanted to, and if anybody were interested in it. But nobody has the time to read that book as regards getting an interview. That's not the point. The point is we're trying to demonstrate Matt's ability to do something that's relevant to his target audience if he were applying for jobs. And here's an example of something that he did that target audience should find interesting. Most people don't do this on their CV, or if they have a go at it, it's far too late in the CV to make any difference to their interview prospects. So we recommend getting these career highlights on page 1, and they will make a big difference. They're providing the proof to support what you've just claimed, and as I say, if any of you have filled out application forms, this is the kind of content that works really well on application forms. It's the proof to back up a claim. It's the real-life example, a case study, if you like. Okay, so having said career highlights are very important, there are some cautionary things to look out for. When we see people have a go at this themselves, either following our format or their own kind of invention, or if we see a CV that's come through and somebody wants to look at it before they decide whether to proceed with our services, if people have actually had a go at this, and they're rare to be honest, what they normally do is they're providing examples that are too weak. And if you provide weak examples, it doesn't help your cause. It highlights, as I say on the slide, it highlights failure rather than success. So you need to be really careful about the examples you pick. The examples you pick ought not to be things that necessarily were the things you enjoyed the most. There's a difference between what you enjoyed the most, possibly even a difference between what you were most successful at and what your target audience is expecting to see. And I've gone on about target audience so many times already, I know, but it is really important. If your marketplace dictates a certain level of skill and competency, and that's well defined and you understand it, you'd be nuts to write a CV that deviated from that if you've got the proof to back it up. So you've got to get inside the head of your target audience. So that's the recruiter to some degree, if there is an intermediary. It's the HR staff possibly, and it's certainly the decision maker who ultimately decides whether to interview or not within the employer. So it's just trying to get a balance between those kind of people and thinking, what are they expecting to see? What will excite them when they see a CV that has certain content, and what is that content? So if you don't spend too much time thinking about your career highlights, you could lose it because people think, well, this isn't relevant, this isn't what I'm interested in. I don't care whether they've done this or done that, however impressive it may seem. What I want is somebody who can do something completely different. So it's important you understand what that is. So relevance and targeting is clear. It's also important that you put examples that do have some kind of oomph behind them. Now, not everybody has a job where you can say that you changed the world, and that's not expected necessarily. It's all relative. If you're in a fairly administrative kind of job, and all you do is do bits of the process that then lead on to an achievement by others, that doesn't actually matter that much, because if you're going for those kind of jobs, that's the expectation behind those kind of jobs. So what's important there is just to make it clear that you have that capability. If you are fortunate enough to be in a job where you do have some meaningful achievements, just try and grab hold of what those KPIs were. What was the end result? If you saved money, that's important. If you sold lots of product, that's important. If you made the company lots of money, or you turned around a business, or you introduced a new process that made things more efficient, it's those kind of things. Grab the ones that really sound appropriate, and justify why somebody should be investing a lot of their money in you as an individual. It's where we earn our money in terms of when people come to us and say, please help me write my CV. This is the kind of thing we spend a lot of time trying to extract from the individual. So in a lot of cases, people underestimate what they've done, undervalue what they've done, sometimes overvalue what they've done, and we can act as an arbiter and say, okay, if you're going for these kind of jobs and you've got this kind of experience, there must be lurking amongst that experience examples of when you've done similar things. Tell us about them. Sometimes it's quite easy and people are quite forthcoming. Sometimes it's like pulling teeth. But in the nicest possible way, we will get to that information, extract it from the individuals, and then we can write a really good CV because of the content that we've got, the raw material we have. Note at the bottom, really important, remember, amongst a few other things, real test of your CV is whether it's getting you interviews or not. So always remember that. Not getting the interviews points to the CV being a problem. If you know it's the CV is a problem, then you can do something about it. What you do is then up to you, but it's either fix it yourself or got somebody to help you. Okay, we're going to pause there again briefly and just look at the CV that I showed you earlier. So Matt's CV again, and I'll just slightly reduce the amount, the size on screen, but increase the amount you can actually see on the screen on slide that's just appearing now. So we've got Matt's CV. We've talked about the first two sections. So as I said, this career highlights bit typically takes 3 case studies and demonstrates them on page. So you should be able to see now the slide with those 3 career highlights. So far, we've built this business case for Matt. We've talked about what he's good at, the skills he has, proof of that through the career highlights, case studies if you like. We've still not yet got to the point at where he's worked and what does he do. But we do, of course, need to deal with that, and that's what we'll deal with next. But the purpose of this is to really reinforce the fact that you're building this business case. Where you currently work and what you're currently doing is not as important to your target audience as you might think. What is important is whether you stand an earthly chance of being able to perform the job that they've got on offer. And all of the information that you can see on the slide, on the screen at the moment, i.e. the top 2/3 of page 1 of Matt's CV, is all about building the business case as to why somebody should consider hiring him. And so excluded from that is, as I've mentioned, but just worth repeating, nothing to do about where he lives, nothing to do about his hobbies or interests, nothing to do with all the wonderful communication skills that he's got or hasn't got. They're not important. Nothing about whether he can work as an individual or as part of a team, which most people seem to mention on their CV, and if you have done, I would recommend removing it tomorrow morning. Nothing about how he behaves in certain circumstances or any behavioural skills. It's all fact, hard evidence-driven fact. And if there's the merest hint of something that he's good at, it gets proven later on in the document, either within the career highlights or elsewhere. Okay, so that's the CV so far. That's the business case bit largely done. Not completely done, but largely done. So the next section we'd recommend having, and as I hinted at, is getting across now the bit about where you currently are or where you have been most recently. And again, a lot of people charge into this and just produce, again, a list of places they've worked for and jobs that they've done. And it's a bit more, you need to give it a bit more consideration than that. And our view is that it is all about the structure of the document, the architecture. This makes a really big difference. Most people get this right, or at least the first part right. Most people do go in reverse chronological order. So you start with your most recent job or the job you currently have and then work backwards. Few people still start with their first job and work forwards, which is hideous, particularly if you've got a career more than 10, 15 years long. But reverse chronological order is the way. And importantly, you need to get this on page 1 of the CV. Again, most people tend to do this, but they get it too far up page 1, as I've hinted. They don't build a business case, go all guns a-blazing and say, here's my name, possibly here's my education, which again is not really the differentiator unless you've got absolutely interstellar qualifications. So that's not important to the employer, not the most important thing, I should say anyway. And then they go straight into, and I'm currently doing this job with this company, and they don't build a business case at all. It's just a list. So it is important you get your employer most recent or current on page 1, but not at the top of page 1. We recommend you provide a bit of a description about who you're actually working for. Don't assume that anybody knows who you're working for, certainly if it's a business that doesn't advertise regularly or isn't well known within the area that you're applying, and that's probably most people. So, and to be honest, even if you work for a big brand like a Virgin, a Rolls-Royce, a BMW, an Apple, or whoever, Those companies have so many divisions and subdivisions that just putting the fact that you work for Rolls-Royce, for example, actually doesn't help either. It's impressive, but is it the aero engine division or is it the car division? They're two completely different companies with two completely different ownership structures. So it's important that you provide a bit of a description, or we would say. You need to provide a bit of a summary of the role, structure of the team you're working in, how your role is measured. I'll show you some examples in a minute, and I'm rattling through these a bit just to build the point. Yes, something about your duties and responsibilities. Now, again, most people tend to overburden this area, so they take their job description and almost dump it, copy and paste it onto their CV. That is not what it's about. You need to give some structure to what you're actually tasked with doing, but the focus needs to be on actual achievements. There is a balance to be had, and the balance needs to be in favour of achievements by and large. Sometimes you put a reason for why you've left a business, and here's some examples of just those first few points. So we'll see in Matt's case shortly. So this assumes that you're describing your most recent role. Let's say it's Joe Bloggs PLC. You've got the dates for when you started and either finished or to present or to date, if you're still there. And then you put your job title, whatever that may be, and then you provide the text you can see in red, green and blue at the bottom of this slide. So a little bit about the business, its structure, its size, a little bit about the team and how you fit in, and a little bit about what you're actually measured for and responsible for. Now, this, for different roles, this can be less or more detailed. It's just an example. The principle being, don't, like most people do, just say, I work for Joe Bloggs PLC as a such and such a job title, and then you just list responsibilities and duties. Because most readers will think, well, who on earth is that company? What on earth is its role? How do they fit in? Do they have any reportees? Who do they report into? What's the size of the business? Is it similar to our business, or is it much bigger or much smaller? And all of those things will come out in the wash anyway, so you may as well front them up and just explain to people how on earth you fit into your current business and what that business is about. Makes life a lot easier for people who are reading the CV at a bit more detailed level. So we'd recommend taking that kind of approach for at least the current job, and I'll come on to what you do for earlier jobs shortly, but so the last few years, sort of 7 to 10 year horizon, you need to provide in this level of detail for each of the jobs you've had within reason. But certainly the most recent one, you need to go into some kind of detail about this. Now, take a quick look at Matt's CV to show how that all fits in. So I'm now going to scroll down, so it may take a little while to feed through on your screen. But what I'll be showing you now on screen is the bottom half of page 1 and the top third of page 2 of Matt's CV. So you can see, important thing is you get across on page 1 the current or most recent job that you've had, and you can see it's describing who the company is, Matt's position, the dates that he worked for the business, brief explanation about what on earth the company is about, and then some bits and pieces, much as I suggested. You know, what is Matt's role, what is KPIs, what's the kind of team that he's working within and has working for him, and what are the responsibilities resting on his shoulder. So it's just a brief explanation. So anybody reading that, they still might not get the detail, but at least they have a broad idea of what Matt's all about and what he's used to work-wise. Okay, we'll come back to that later, as I say. Bit of a break, not so much for me, but for you in terms of theory. One of the questions that we tend to get asked at the end of the session more often than anything else is, what on earth do we do? Can we help? So I'll briefly describe that now, so that for those that need to disappear when we've done, you can do so without hanging on. Webrecruit are obviously keen for us to offer our webinar attendees some kind of deal for attending the session, some kind of carrot, if you like. So if you do decide, so the important thing is, first of all, do you need to do anything with your CV? If you still remain undecided about that, we can help you with that decision at some future stage. But if you decided you do need to do something, two choices. Do you fix it yourself or do you get somebody to help you? We can help you. Unfortunately, that does cost money. If you do decide to use our services, then first thing you should be reassured about is that we do have a track record and can, generally speaking, significantly increase the number of interviews you're getting by sorting your CV and to some degree your LinkedIn profile out. So that is possible, it happens, it's realistic, it's real. If you go down that route, we match you up with a senior professional who understands your marketplace. They have a telephone or Skype session with you, pretty much whatever hours you want to work, so it's not just 9 to 5. We have a discussion with you, understand what you're trying to do. Importantly, if you don't already know what your value proposition is and how you take that to the market, we'll sort that out for you. If you don't know what your value-added skills are, we'll identify them and make sure that you're going to market with the right ones. And we'll talk through those case studies, career highlights that I mentioned, so like Matt's example with Enterprise Rent-A-Car, we'll get those out of you in the nicest possible way and make sure that we then focus on those and build them up onto your CV so that you get a brand new CV from scratch. We don't amend CVs, we don't tweak them or refine them. That is virtually pointless. We completely get rid of the old one, build the business case for the new one and write it for you. And therefore you can increase your chances of being appealing to the employers you're gunning for. At the end of this session, which we're not far off from now in fairness, if you're interested in that, we've got some fantastic deals that Web and I have encouraged us to offer to you. So if you are thinking about that, it's the best time to be thinking about it. You won't get any better deals than the ones you're about to see. Back onto the CV. So let's just imagine for a moment, we've talked about the building the business case and all the sections that led up to that. We've started now talking about the career itself, so who you've been working for, the dates, the title of job, the background, the structure, the team, background information, achievements, duties and responsibilities. And we tend to do that, as I said earlier, for probably the first roughly 8 to 10 years of your career, sorry, the most recent 8 to 10 years of your career, or 4 jobs depending. So some people have done a lot of jobs recently, some people have been in the same job all their lives. So there needs to be a decision made on how much detail you focus on. But one thing you ought not to be doing is detailing everything that you've done since the year dot if you've got a career longer than 10 years long. Because I guarantee nobody is going to be remotely interested in what happened in 1990 something or other, or worse still 1980 something or other. That's not going to decide whether you get an interview or not. You do need to explain what you've been up to, but that's wholly different from providing detail. And the worst CVs are the ones where there's only a little bit, there's scant information about your current role, yet miraculously, because you've just added to your CV over time, you've got War and Peace on what happened in 1983. That just looks horrendous, and it just comes across as being lazy, and as if somebody just evolved their CV over time and couldn't be bothered with the most recent stuff. So that focus needs to be lots of detail on right now, lots of detail on probably the last 8 to 10 years roughly, or 4 jobs depending on what your circumstances are, and then everything after that just becomes a line, which most people are a bit surprised by. But this is the difference between a CV that gets interviews and a CV that's just providing a list of stuff. So again, do not fall into the trap of thinking that people are going to be remotely interested or in what you did more than 10 years ago as far as making the decision on whether to interview you or not. And that's the difference. To get the interview, it's all about the recent. They might be interested in what you've been up to at interview, but that's a different process. So for all your earlier career, you just need to put what date you started, what date you finished, who was it with employer-wise, what your job title was, and possibly whether it was a contract or a permanent role if you've done either or in your career. Nothing else. And if you need more justification of that, then by all means call us, email us, or question me at the end of the session. But that's how brutal you have to be. Focus on the positive, recent stuff, not the older stuff. Note at the bottom of this slide, it's actually quite important. More and more people are gradually taking advice on their CV, and that could be a whole host of things. So however you go about it, as I say, if you write the CV yourself but you do a good job of it, or you get somebody to write it for you professionally, as long as the result's positive and professional, just bear in mind that people, partly because of these webinars and things like it, partly because of a lot of competition in the marketplace, more and more people are going to market with a professionally written CV. It's still nowhere near saturation, unfortunately, but more and more people are doing it. Therefore, more of your competition will have a better CV than average, and you need to be in that pool. Because it is tough out there. Again, if you're not getting the interviews or not getting the number of interviews you'd like, that's a good indicator that you need to do something. If you're quite happy with the level of interviews you're getting, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But the competition is increasing. A few bits and pieces on the CV that we just need to briefly explain how to handle before we wrap up, because we're just about on the hour now. Not really talked about much about educational qualifications right now, and CPD, for those that need to know, is continual professional development. So it's anything you've done to help improve your skills and training and such like. A lot of people fall into the trap of putting at their CV, particularly if all they've done is evolve their CV over time. A lot of people fall into the trap of putting their education on the first page. Now, in very rare exceptions, that's not necessary. It's not the thing that's going to differentiate you from others. If you've got an MBA or a particularly good degree, or you've got a degree, all of that can be mentioned in the professional summary. So if you remember that example of the finance director, I think the opening statement was something like, an experienced finance director, blah, 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 blah. You could easily change that to an experienced MBA qualified or degree educated or such and such qualified finance director. That's how you'd introduce those key facts into the first part of your CV, because that is important. MBA is a very appealing qualification most of the time. So is having a degree. If you have a particular technical qualification, for example, if you're a project manager and you're Prince 2 qualified, or if you're an accountant and you're CIMA or ACCA qualified, you could do the same kind of thing. You could say ACCA qualified accountant, or words similar. So get the important stuff, yes, on page 1, but not in detail. People are not going to want to know, in terms of making the judgment on interview, details of your education over and above what you can deliver for their business. So talk about education, but towards the back of the CV. Yes, talk about professional qualifications that you have, training courses that you have. Only mention universities and schools either if they're high profile and infer a certain level of ability, or if they're material to the job sector you're applying for jobs within. But generally speaking, you go with the highest level of qualification and place that you have had your education at. So if it's a degree, you leave it at that. You don't talk about where you went to secondary school, where you got your GCSEs from, or things like that. You don't need to put dates on your education, again, unless it explains a gap between jobs, because otherwise it's giving away age, which may or may not help you. Also, I've referred to personal details a few times and them not being necessarily on page 1 of the CV, except name and contact details. Again, this is really important because, and we tend to put this section towards the end of the CV. The reason why we do that is because sometimes geography can hurt your chances. Hypothetically, let's say you live in Cornwall, you apply for a job in Glasgow because you've got family in Glasgow and you want to relocate. You don't want somebody just looking at your CV and thinking, well, this person can't possibly be interested in the job or relevant for it because they live in the wrong part of the country. And even worse, if you're looking to move from a country to the UK and you lead with your address as being wherever you're currently based, be that France, Cyprus, the Far East, Australia, again, it just infers that you're maybe a time waster. And it doesn't matter whether you've sent a covering note or you explain it later on the CV. Most people will just look at that, make a judgment, and they may have lost all the other supporting information you've sent them. So don't make it easy for people to dismiss you. We recommend that, yes, you provide certain levels of contact information. It's up to you whether you have your address on there. Some people like it, some people don't. If you haven't already mentioned the email on the first part of the CV in place of one of the telephone numbers that we had on Matt's CV, for example, you could put your email. So you can people tend to have a name, email, home number, email, mobile number, home, mobile number, or home email number, or any combination of those. But whatever you don't mention on page 1, you mention somewhere else on the CV, of course. There are a few other bits and pieces that you should mention if they're relevant, so I'll just flick them up onto the screen. But driving license for people that need to travel. Mobility refers to if you're wanting to relocate, you're actively relocating, or even you have relocated but you've still got a postal address that's not quite right. Make some reference to that on the CV so that it is there at least to back up some claim that you're making about flexibility. If you've got particular security clearance is a good example of an unusual characteristic that most people don't have. It's worth mentioning. Ditto CRB checks for those people involved in that line of work, languages, and eligibility to work in the UK if it's not implied by where you're currently living is important. And then a few general bits and pieces, and then I'll wrap up by showing you Matt's CV with these bits and pieces in. You'd have gathered, or possibly gathered, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, that writing style is really important. You get that right, and you can fit an awful lot of content into a relatively small amount of space by removing unnecessary words, focusing on the important content, thinking about the message you're trying to send your target audience. We write CVs in the third person, so some people write they use their first name within the CV, so they write from the first person, or they say I this or I that. That's not a good way of writing your CV. Interestingly, on LinkedIn that works better, and we changed the tense we write on our LinkedIn profiles, but for the CV you write in the third person. You'd be surprised how many people still make spelling mistakes on their CV, and that these days is almost an instant rejection. Even if you're the best person for the role, it's so easy for the recruiter or HR person to say, the reason I rejected this person was because they couldn't spell or the grammar was poor. And virtually nobody will argue with them. It's a great way of justifying why you've rejected somebody, to take the time to check your CV. And formatting, that's a very subjective area. You'll have gathered from the CV that you saw that I've been showing you this evening that we use a particular style. Per se, within reason, the font you use, the size of the font, it's important, but it's not critical. There are some fonts you should definitely not use. There's some font sizes that you should definitely not use, and you certainly shouldn't be using wacky creative graphics and complex HTML coding or anything like that. That doesn't help the cause. So it's just clear, crisp, but the overriding importance is, as long as people can read it, is the content. And you get the content right and the message right, and life will become a lot easier. Let me just show you briefly the CV towards the end of it. So now I'm going to just try and get on the bottom of page 2 of Matt's CV and the top of page 3. Some people often ask, should the CV be a certain length? And there is no real, despite what people will tell you, unless you're specifically asked to provide your CV in a certain length, then there is no real right or wrong answer. The general, most of the CVs we write, and the general rule of thumb is that it's probably a 2 or a 3-page document. But we've never had anybody who we've written a 4-page CV for be rejected purely because they had a 4-page CV. It's all about the content. So what people tend to dislike is any length of that CV that's not appropriate for their needs. And often then they'll use the excuse, oh, it wasn't the right length, or it's too long, and that's not really the truth. The truth is the content was poor. So don't get too hung up about how long your CV is within reason. Most people, as I say, 2 or 3 pages, irrespective of length of career. So on the screen now you should be seeing the bottom of page 2 of Matt's CV with one of his earlier employees, Hayes, and then leading into some of those other areas that I talked about on page 3. So his earlier career, and you'll notice even though Enterprise Rent-A-Car, we chose to feature something from that experience on page 1 of the CV, so that little career highlight that I talked you through. It came from a period in his life quite early in his career that we've now abbreviated to 1 line. That's the beauty of those career highlights, interestingly. They're not time-stamped. When you read that, you might have been thinking that was quite recent. It wasn't. It was quite a few years ago, and we're only making reference to it on 1-liner on his CV. So we've drawn something out of that experience because it's still relevant, appropriate and impressive, and putting it as a career highlight. It's a great way for those people who are trying to call on experience that they've had in the past, which isn't quite what they're doing right now, but they want to talk about that on their CV. So if you're looking to make a job change, or you're currently in a job that's not reflective of where you want to be, but you've got that experience from some time in the past, the structure of CV that I've shown you is a really good way of dealing with that. Then you see Matt's education and, in his case, memberships, and then right at the bottom, personal details, and an area that I've not yet mentioned, but I'm going to briefly talk about now, called recommendations. And this is optional. Some people have this information and can use it, and some people don't, and it doesn't matter. If you've got it, great. If you haven't, don't worry about it. But recommendations is, we used to call it testimonial evidence, and what it's about is just providing, again, more evidence, because you'll notice that these are quotes from real-life people about Matt's abilities at certain levels. Don't need to read the detail, but most people have got either from historic files, emails, letters, or they can pinch them from LinkedIn. If you've got a LinkedIn account and you've had some proper recommendations, we can take that content and stick it on the CV, and we'd recommend you do the same, because it can add some value to the message. A good recommendation is from a former boss, line manager, somebody that's hired you, saying that you, in effect, can do the stuff that's been claimed on the CV. A bad recommendation is one from your peer group, or somebody who's clearly just said something, some nonsense about you being a good operator, but with no proof or substance, and worse still, being from somebody who's never responsible for hiring you or managing you. So be very careful about what you put, and it's better not to have anything than have the wrong recommendations. I'll talk about LinkedIn in a minute, but the other thing to remove from your CV, if you've got it, is references available on request, wholly meaningless. Most people tend to write that, and then some people then tend to put some references available and they detail the contact details and names and addresses. I just wouldn't bother with any of it. It takes up valuable space that can be used for other purposes. Doesn't materially change whether you get interviewed or not, and all the thing about references is future dated, way beyond the interview process. Remember, your CV is to get you the interviews. It's not to justify why somebody should actually be offering you a job, because they're not going to at that stage. So remove all of that stuff from your CV, focus on the positive stuff, and replace it, if you can, with recommendations from people who've actually worked with you. Okay, finally, LinkedIn. I'm not going to go into detail right now because we don't have the time. We've overstepped our welcome, if you like, or I've overstepped my welcome. Suffice to say, it's very important if you're interested in new opportunities or raising your profile. And so, worst case situation, if you've got a bad CV and you've just dumped it into LinkedIn, guess what? You've replicated the problem. If you've got a good CV and you've replicated it on LinkedIn, worry less. And if you don't have a LinkedIn profile at all and you're trying to find a job and get noticed out there, get a LinkedIn profile pretty soon. Make sure it's... You remember earlier on in the slide, that note right down at the bottom of this current slide, you remember I said that something like 92% of recruiters and hiring managers can only make a decision based on the content of your CV as to whether they interview you or not. Goes a little bit deeper now than that, as I hinted at the time. Of that 92%, the vast majority, again, over 80%, will check you out on LinkedIn before inviting you to interview. And that's the key thing, before inviting you to interview. So let's say you've got past the first hurdle. Somebody's thinking could be possible, could be a good candidate. Maybe you're amongst 10 people and they really want to interview 3 or 5. They look at your LinkedIn profile and of your peer group, your competitors, and suddenly they find some disconnect, or suddenly there's something that's making them think, it says this on their CV, that on their LinkedIn profile, but there are 3 people who are saying exactly the same thing. The message is clear. You could lose things at the last moment by having an ineffective LinkedIn profile. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, I wouldn't say right now it's at the stage where people would say, that's odd, why haven't they got a LinkedIn profile, I'm not going to interview them. but it's getting close to that point for some roles. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you might have some good reasons for that, and we'd listen to those reasons if we were considering writing your CV, but we'd probably be recommending quite strongly that if you're looking for opportunities, wanting to raise your profile, you take a role on LinkedIn. Interestingly, how you structure the LinkedIn profile is quite different from your CV. The words you use, the tense, the style. So if you're just porting across stuff from your CV, it's not that it's damaging you, but it's not helping your cause. As I mentioned to those that were on earlier, sort of early doors, I made reference to the fact that we do have a webinar going into LinkedIn in a lot more detail, in fact this time next week. What I'm going to do right now, if you're interested in that, is just paste into the chat room thingy the link to that webinar if you're interested. So I'll just put it in a few times. So you click on this link, it's completely free, you register much like you did for this webinar, and it will go into a lot more detail about LinkedIn. So if you're up for that, you're more than welcome to come and join. Okay, finally, what can we do for you if you're interested? So again, if you've made the decision you need to do something, two choices: use us or do it yourself. If you use us, got a great deal until end of this week. Normal rate card prices that we charge for writing a CV, this is for anybody with more than 7 years work experience, I stress. So if you've got less than 7 years experience, we need to have a chat, because in fairness it's not appropriate to charge you the full amount of money. If you've got more than 7 years work experience, to do a CV normally costs $299 plus VAT. It's a complex process, a lot of work goes into it. No, it's a lot of money, but that's the harsh reality. That's what it costs, pretty much anywhere else as well for the same service. So $299 plus VAT, it's 50 quid plus VAT for the LinkedIn profile, so that's $349 plus VAT for the two things. Tonight and then until Friday 17th, we're going to offer that to attendees of tonight's session for $275 plus VAT. So you get both LinkedIn and CV profile written for you for less than the cost of a CV normally, over 100 quid saving. You need to visit this website address if you're interested in that, and then it will take care of you, explain the process, you can pay and do all the bits and pieces. I'll post this because you can't click on the screen. I'll post this very shortly into the chat room whilst we go through this, and I'm doing it now. Here you go, for those that are interested. Okay, first 10 people that order get something else as well. They get a free cover letter, which is worth 30 quid plus VAT, and access to our interview coaching package, which is a really nifty piece of kit. It's all internet driven, jump online, practice interviewing, and you can assess yourself, and it's all recorded via your own privacy and on a webcam. Really useful piece of kit, great way to practice interviews. So first 10 people that order the CV and LinkedIn profile deal get free cover letter and that interview coaching package. If you're interested in doing something yourself, though, for the time being, on the web link that I've just posted into the chat room facility, there's two things. You can either click on the link and say, yeah, up for the CV and LinkedIn profile, but there's also something else you can buy just for 15 quid plus VAT, so 18 quid, so virtually peanuts. You get a pack, which is some CV templates, a workbook, an interview ebook, so interview tips, hints, and it's a great way of just getting a little bit toe in the water, if you like. Gives you some hints and tips based on this evening's webinar, how to build your CV, and if you subsequently decide you still need our help, we'll give you your money back on that if you order the full Monty. So quite a few things hopefully there that could be of help to you. I'd say the key thing is decide whether you need help in the first place or whether you need to improve your CV. Second thing is then, if you do need help, do something. Whatever you do, do something. If you know you're not getting any interviews, don't go through that pain, get it fixed. Either fix it yourself or have a go, measure the results, or get somebody to help you. Okay, we're done. So I promise to answer questions. I'll now take a look and see if any have been asked. If you need to disappear, though, by all means, you can exit this webinar if you don't want to listen to the answers of the questions. And I thank you for your time. Wish you good night. Anybody that's attended this evening will be invited to receive a recording of the webinar, so you can take a look at it at your own leisure. That will happen tomorrow morning. Meantime, I'll now go into the questions. So good night to those that need to leave us, and to anybody else wanting a question answered. I'll deal with them in order, and starting with, let's just have a look who we got here. Okay, we've got a few here. Okay, so Sanu, hopefully you're still online. How would you advise someone to write a CV when they are changing their career or a slight change in their career? And that's a very good question. And obviously the devil's in the detail, but generally speaking, if you're going to make a change in career, what we'd be looking to do is try and assess all the competencies that you've got that are transferable. And those career highlights, Sanu, that you might have seen earlier, we need to try and make those as relevant to your destination, your career objective as possible. So if you've literally got no experience of that new career, we have to get a bit creative and really dig deep and say, okay, what are those kind of jobs looking for? What have you got to offer in that space, and try and make the best job of it. Now, realistically, you have to accept you're not going to win all the battles. A good CV can't work miracles, so it can only do a certain amount. Our experience is quite a few people have gone through this process with us. We'd say, we can make a difference, but just be realistic on the stats. You're not suddenly going to become the answer to everybody's problems in this new direction you want to take. But as long as you've got something, some underlying competence, experience, anything that we can grasp hold of, our job would be to say, okay, what's your target audience looking for? What have you got in your toolkit? And match the two as best possible. So that's how we'd handle it. Obviously, probably need to know a little bit more to give you a more accurate answer. So by all means, contact us separately if you'd like to. Colin, what if I have had example in the last 2 months, 15 interviews from nothing being within. Sorry, Colin, I'm mumbling a bit just to read your question because you know what it is. Just let me absorb this, and then I'll try and summarise to the others. Going to interview, problems getting the job 2 or 3 times, got interviewed, but have interviewed well. But I've had people that are 5 years professional with the business coming in. Okay, so that's it's quite a complicated one. So the good news, by the sounds of it, Colin, if I'm right, is that you are getting the interviews. So that's encouraging. If that's a satisfactory level, I'm just saying the stats are obvious to me. So apologies if I'm not quite getting the underlying info right. But if you're getting the interviews, that's good. If you genuinely believe you're losing it at face-to-face interview, then there are 2 things. Either what you're being told is the truth, and there are just people who are pipping you to the post, and that's going to be tough. There's not a lot you can do about that. It's just a numbers game, crudely, unless you can reposition yourself. So if you're getting feedback that's suggesting that you are close to the mark, but there's always somebody there with something else, can you realign where you're aiming to a kind of employer that might be a little bit more forgiving, or where that missing bit isn't so important? Easy for me to say, and I know that may appear to be a bit of a clutching at straws kind of comment, but genuinely we've seen a lot of people who they've just adjusted their targets slightly. Makes a huge difference. I don't know whether that's realistic in your case, but that's a viable option. Failing that, the other option, as I say, you're either being told the truth and then you can act upon it. I suppose playing devil's advocate is you may not be told the whole. You may not be being told the whole truth, and there's something going on in the interview process that is not good for you. But what is it is really difficult to find out. And may actually require somebody to be honest with you, or I don't know. I mean, to be honest, Colin, give me a ring. By all means, dig us up on the look at our website, give the number a call, ask for me. If I'm not in the office, I'll give you my number and or transfer through, and maybe we can have a chat. And if I sincerely think, oh crumbs, there's something going on here, I have to say we deal with some individuals who are just wholly difficult to get on with on the phone, let alone face to face. So if there's something obvious there, we'll tell people, because it's no skin off our back. My experience is it's very hard. People very rarely get information about their interview performance that's wholly accurate, because people just want to they want to shy away from the reality. Now that almost sounds horribly negative, and I really genuinely don't mean it to sound negative. I'm just being honest in saying, in our experience, there's two camps. You're getting the truth, you use it, you act on it, it'll solve the problem, or you're not getting quite told the truth, therefore there's something lurking there that people are afraid to talk about, which means it needs to be sorted, and a third party impartial person can normally identify that pretty quickly. Hope that helps. Sanu, would you recommend use of jargon, e.g. which isn't broken down in the CV? Good point, Sanu. Actually, no, we definitely normally would not recommend the use of jargon, and in Matt's case, that's the only slight exception to that is there's a couple of places where he mentions enterprise rent-a-car, and also because in that particular case it's not actually that important who it is, it's the message lurking behind it. If you'd filled out your job, your CV and the career history with loads of jargon, that's not good practice, without first putting it in full and then in brackets the abbreviation. That's accepted practice. So normally the rule of thumb is, for any genuine piece of jargon which is relevant to the CV and its message, you mention the full version, you put in brackets the abbreviation, and then subsequently you can use the abbreviation. Excuse me. In that particular case, you're right in one sense, it isn't perfect, but actually the problem Matt faces, enterprise rent-a-car, such a huge name, it takes up too much space and means that that career history becomes slightly too long and out of sync. So he abbreviated it because it's just saves space. But the secondary thing, genuine reason why he did that, is because it isn't actually that important who it is. The important bit is there was a new business, it was unprofitable, he did some things and made it profitable. That's the real message. So he sort of justifies it that way. And we would do the same with an individual. Sally again, I've been applying through many online recruitment consultants, such as No Site, Job Sites, etc. Never received any interest or heard back from them. This has been going on for 6 years on and off. Starting to doubt they don't bother looking for CVs or even remove job ads from the sites, so people spend a lot of time for no reason. What are your thoughts on this? Would you advise us to stay away from such sites? Yeah, really good question, Sandy. Very frustrating also. Yeah, we hear all sorts. So it's almost impossible to be accurate about this and to avoid being sued by somebody. But yeah, harsh reality is all sorts goes on, and you, I, and many others will never know the truth. But bottom line is, if you're seeing jobs that are fresh, that are relevant, and you're applying for them and not getting something back, yes, there may well be some what I'd call dodgy jobs, let's say things that don't really exist possibly. Yes, there may be some that have expired and people have forgotten to remove them, and sometimes that's generally just human error. You know, it's sometimes these things are automated, sometimes they're not automated, and it requires somebody to go in and remove the job. And that people don't do that deliberately. It's just one of those things, human nature. And then sometimes all sorts of other strange things go on. But the bottom line is, I would say, Tony, if you're generally not getting much interest from any of these things, my initial concern would be there's something wrong with the CV. Because let's just think about it. If you've got any recruiter out there, and I promise you it's difficult for recruiters to find good people. One of the biggest frustrations across nearly all sectors is that despite the fact there's quite a few people looking for jobs, trying to find good people is really tough. The clients are demanding, risk averse at the moment still, struggle to find good talent, and the recruiters go round and round trying to find that talent for their clients. Not asking you to feel sorry for them necessarily, just saying that is the way it is. So if your CV stands up, irrespective, even if there were no job, if it hit the desk of a recruitment consultant, normally they'd be on it and they'd be thinking, okay, we don't have a job, but this individual looks good, let's get hold of them. So my initial concern would be maybe the CV is not quite up to spec. Now, as I say to anybody on still, if you want to send your CV to us, completely free, we'll take a look at it, give it an assessment and say, okay, look, our view is it's not good, do something about it, then you can choose what you want to do. Conversely, I might say, actually, no, that's a pretty good CV, I'm not really sure what's going on here, then at least you know there's something else going wrong. I hope that helps. Colin, question 2. Why is it that on application forms the employer wishes to know why you have left for all the time? Why you've left for all the time on app forms? Okay, Colin, I'm just trying to read that. Why is it that on application forms the employer wishes to know why you have left for all the time on app forms? So if I've read that right, I think it's slightly out of sync as far as I can see. But if they're looking for the reasons why you've left, that's just to build up a trait for them. Again, we don't tend to write on the CV why people have left because it's not the standard practice, and it is relatively rare. Often these forms that employers use are ancient, or they've just gone with a form they've seen somewhere else. So what they're actually doing with that information varies enormously. Generally speaking, they're probably trying to build up a picture, and what they're trying to avoid is taking on people who've maybe been in jobs for short periods of time or have left for what they would regard as being strange reasons, or have got a track record of not lasting very long. Now, what's unfair about that is that there may be a whole heap of reasons why that was so, but that's why they're just trying to build up a track record, a bit of a hit, almost like a bit of a credit score, but job-wise. Sanu's left the building. Too wordy, grammar, lots of text. Also, it should be on one page. So Sanu has left, but he mentioned about it should be on one page. Normally, people who say they want a one-page CV is because they can't be bothered to read detail, and they don't see on most people's CVs the information they really want. So it's not really about the one page, it's more about the appropriateness of the content. I say we've never had anybody come back to us and said the 2 or 3 page CV that you wrote for us didn't work because it was 2 or 3 pages. It never ever happened. Colin again, within question 1, since I've been volunteering, some people like this, it's a turn off. Why do I manage, how do I manage that maybe? Okay, again, good question, Colin. It depends is a not very helpful answer. Depends what you've been doing volunteering, and it depends on who you're targeting. If it's been involved in some very charitable pursuit, raising money, helping certain causes, then we tend to put that thing on the CV. Then towards the end of the CV, as a sort of a, by the way, you know, this sort of indicates what I'm about. There's no harm about it. There's no harm in putting it on, unless it appears, and so, I'm sorry, it sounded a bit confusing here, but what's not so good is if you lead with that, or it becomes apparent that that's what you've been up to most recently. So if you give the appearance that you've come out of work and then gone into this, that's the bit that has a problem. Now, my argument would be to try and get around. You can't change what's happened, obviously. You know, what's happened has happened, and all we can do, and all we'd recommend doing, is building that business case as strongly as you can before you get to the point of having to describe what has happened most recently or where you are currently at. And just accept that statistically that might not be as good for you as if you were currently in full-time employment doing a job virtually that of which the employer is looking to recruit, who will be probably the favoured option right now, and just accept that somebody out there will view what you've got to offer and your circumstances as being possibly quite positive. It's just trying to understand what it is you're trying to do, who you're trying to target, and then making the best possible link. But on your CV, building the business case strongly before getting to what's happened most recently in your life. I hope that's helpful. Rodica, I hope I pronounced that right. How can I make my job description to be highlighted, not to be bland and exciting? That's a very good question, Rodica. And it again, devil's in the detail. It depends on what you're doing, who you've been doing it for, and what you're trying to do in the future. but most people's job descriptions are horribly bland, so we don't make reference to the job description other than try and paint a picture about what you're capable of, what you've been doing. If we were writing your CV, we'd probably ignore the job description and say, okay, tell us about who you've been working for, tell us about what you've been doing, tell us about what you'd like to be doing in the future, match those two, and then start to look for evidence to support why you'd be a good, whatever job you're looking for, person. And I bet you lurking somewhere in your experience are some actually slightly more exciting, interesting things. And you may not think of it that way, but I bet you a pint that we could find something that was more appealing lurking in there. But again, it's devil's in the detail. It just takes a bit of hard work to get to it. Okay, that looks like it's the end of the questions. So I will now start to wrap up this. So if anyone's got any last-minute questions, rattle them in pretty quickly. Thank you again to those that joined this evening. I'll bid you good night. I'll sign off within the next 30 seconds, so this thing will sort of disappear and melt away. But I say more than happy to answer any personal questions if you want to contact us directly. Thanks again. Good night. Hope you enjoyed the session, and best of luck to you all.